Chapter 23. Nell, with a dark blue silk kimono belted around her slender waist, was brushing her hair for the night. It lay loose upon her shoulders in a soft, wavy tan mass, and as she brushed, she walked around the room, putting clothes away in the closet, opening the bed, bringing out Rob's pajamas, and talked to him about Ken. "I wish you'd be nicer to him, Ken." "Why? He's gone against everything I told him to do." "I think he's suffering deeply." "Suffering? So am I. And what's it all for?" Rob, seated in the low armchair, reached out a booted foot and dragged the boot jack close. He planted one foot upon it and set the other heel in the notch, continuing, "If he was going to have a horse to break and train as Howard did Highboy, it would have taught him something, made a man of him. But what can he do with this poor little filly? Not a darn thing. He'll sit in that pasture and watch her all summer and neglect his work. Howard has been walking his colts for him for 2 days." He pulled hard against the jack and drew one foot out of the long, worn brown boot. "Give him a little time, Rob," pleaded Nell. "He's all torn up." "So am I. I'm burned up." He pulled off the other boot and pursued his thought. "There isn't a thing he can do with her in this condition. Couldn't put a halter on her. She's got no strength, even if she should pull through, which I doubt. Frighten her once more, drive her into a corner and rope her and halter her, and she's through." "But Rob, you don't see. It's already done, much of it. Ken has changed already. He's learning, even though he can't train her." "Learning what? Learning to sit on his fanny under a pine tree?" Nell sank down in a stool before Rob's chair and folded her arms on his knees. The week of heat and the hours of daily training and riding of Roomba had burnt the end of her nose and brought color into her face, which was usually the shade and tone of pale waxed pine. Rob leaned back in his chair, and out of his dark face, his vivid, burning blue eyes looked at her without softening. "Learning that it pays to be bullheaded?" "No, he's learning to face facts. And that's the whole thing, isn't it?" "Face facts? I don't see any sign of it," he said harshly. "And the kid looks like hell. If this goes on all summer, he'll be in a fine shape to go back to school in September." Nell felt rebuffed and got up and went about in silence. Rob stood up, picked up his boots, kicked the boot jack back into the corner, went over to Nell, and with the boots hanging in one hand, put the other arm around her. "Love me?" he asked. "I knew you were going to say that," she exclaimed angrily. "When you've just made me mad, that isn't any time to say things like that." His one arm squeezed and shook her a little. "Love me?" he repeated. "I don't feel the least bit loving." "Love me?" The one deep dimple in Nell's right cheek appeared in spite of herself, and she turned her face away. "Oh, yes, then, have it your own way." She made her voice insulting, but it was an irritating habit of Rob's to be satisfied with outward obedience, as if, once that was granted, by his own persistence and violence, he could drive people the rest of the way. "That's all right, then," he said, and with his hard bullet head, pressed her face around until he could kiss her mouth. "But Rob, Ken—" "Don't talk about him," he roared, dropping his arm. "I've had all I can stand of him." He went out of the room, slammed the door, and stamped down the hall to the bathroom. Nell climbed into bed, turned up the kerosene lamp that stood on the bedside table, took her book from beside it, and began to read. Her dimple had disappeared, and her lips were very set and prim. Next day, Rob planned to drive to Sargent's ranch to make final arrangements about shipping the 4 polo ponies. Nell was to go with him, and they would be away all day. When, at breakfast, Howard and Ken heard about it, Ken said, "Would you have time, Dad, to come out before you go and look at Flicka and see how you think she is? She looks better, and she's eating some oats." "No, I wouldn't," roared McLaughlin. "I don't want to see her or think about her." There was a heavy silence. Everyone ate rapidly, eyes down. Presently, McLaughlin's gaze swung over again toward his younger son and noted the circles under the child's eyes. "Did you go swimming with Howard yesterday?" he asked. "No, sir." "Why not?" "I don't want to leave Flicka." "Now I've had enough of this. Howard does your work, and you're all set to spend the summer under the pine tree watching Flicka. Do you suppose that's good for you? What sort of shape will you be in when it's time to go back to school? This is the hottest weather we'll have all summer. Your swim is good for you. You take a dip with Howard today and do your own work, too." "Yes, sir." Presently, Howard said, "Remember what you said, Dad? The Flicka would stay alone and not go near the other horses? You were right. She stays alone in the corner by the fence or under the pines. Why does she? I thought horses liked company." McLaughlin made no reply, and Kenny came bravely out with the answer, "Because she's a lone wolf." McLaughlin turned to Ken, surprised, and the boy looked back at his father. Rarely had he been able to face those hard eyes for so long a minute. He did it now for Flicka. If she was a lone wolf, then he was a lone wolf too. He had to fight her battles. He was with her, the same as her, and it gave him courage. Matching his stare with Ken's, Rob said to himself, "Well, I'll be damned. The little son of a gun. Nell was right. Facing facts. He's taking it on the chin." McLaughlin turned his head away and asked for another piece of toast. Nell jumped up and turned the piece of homemade bread which was lying on the edge of the coal stove. It was toasted to a delicate brown. She brought it, hot and crusty, on the tin turner and slid it onto the edge of Rob's plate. Rob was thoughtful as he took a slab of the fresh, unsalted butter and spread it on his toast. "Ken," he said presently, "that isn't what I meant when I said Flicka would keep to herself. It's because she's sick. A wounded or sick animal always stays alone." Ken's dark eyes, confiding and full of hope, clung to his father's face, and McLaughlin felt an emotion within his breast. "Oh," said the boy. He would have liked to ask if Flicka was not a lone wolf after all, but it seemed wiser not to press his father's sudden kindness. After a moment, McLaughlin said, "Has she salt, Ken?" Ken's face showed such consternation that it was comical. Both Rob and Nell turned away their heads. "No," said Ken guiltily, staring at his father. "I've got a piece of iodized salt up in the stable," said McLaughlin, frowning. "I won't be able to leave right away, Rob," put in Nell. "If you want to go out to Flicka, I've got a few things to do." "All right, Ken," said his father. "I'll bring the salt out to her and give her the once-over." Joy colored Ken's face, and Nell emitted a faint breath of relief. Ken rushed out to Flicka. He had already seen her that morning. Soon after sunrise, he had presented himself, and standing before her said, "I am Ken. Do you know me? Are you getting to like me? My name is Kenneth McLaughlin." He put his fist on his chest. "And your name is Flicka. That means little girl. We're going to be friends." Now he ran out to her again and said, "Dad's coming to look at you, Flicka. Now you be a good girl and don't run away." As if she understood him, Flicka stood quietly at a little distance when McLaughlin came out and set the chunk of iodized salt down near the pine tree. Then he took out his pipe and lit it and examined the filly, while Ken watched his father to read the verdict on his face. Finally, McLaughlin said, "She's so sick and hangdog. It's hard to tell a thing about her now." "Do you think she's loco?" Rob growled. "I would have sworn it by the way she's behaved ever since she was born. But as a matter of fact, we've never seen her except when she was scared out of her wits." Ken thought back. Even the first time he had seen her, when she was running away from Banner and her eyes had looked like balls of fire, then, too, she was terrified. Yes, and when she was brought in the first time and the second. "Every horse looks wild in the eye when it's terrified," added McLaughlin. Ken forced himself to mention the worst piece of evidence against her. "She tried to jump that fence. She knew she couldn't." McLaughlin said, "You must remember she's had the worst possible bringing up." "How?" "She's been brought up by a crazy woman, hasn't she?" "Oh. Besides," said McLaughlin, with a little grin, "anyone, even you or I, can try the impossible once. You know the saying, it couldn't be done, but the darn fool didn't know it and went ahead and did it. Horses have jumped 6 feet or more, trained jumpers. Maybe Flicka thought she could do it. So we'll forgive her that. Point is, will she learn? Can she learn? Rocket couldn't learn." "Dad, if she is loco, like Rocket, couldn't we put her back out on the range?" "Why?" "So she could be like Banner was Sunday, not like Rocket." Rob looked at Ken's face. It was so desperately earnest, so direct, that again the man felt an emotion. Facing things. "Now let's think that through, Ken. Banner's on the range because he has work to do in life, isn't he?" "Yes, sir." "What work?" "Breeding the mares and taking care of them and the colts." "And what's a mare's work?" "To have the colts, or be ridden." "Exactly. But if she's loco, her colts are no good. You saw that bunch I sold last week. Only reason I could sell them is because they're beautiful horses, and there's always some fool ready to take a chance on a horse, loco or not. Someone is breaking them now, or trying to. Some of them are dead or dying or fatally injured. It would have been better if I had put a bullet into every one of them." "Better," faltered Ken, his eyes going to Flicka. "Better for them in the long run. But I needed the money." There was silence for a moment, and McLaughlin's teeth bit into his pipe stem grimly. "Only place for a loco horse, or one who can't be subdued, is on the wide-open range, and far away from civilization, too, where no man can see them and pull them in. If anyone sees them, and if they're beautiful and fast, too, there's no hope for them. Someone's going to have a try at them, and that's the end." Ken could not speak. "You've seen how the bad blood carries on," McLaughlin continued. "As for training them for the saddle, remember how hard I worked with Rocket." "Oh, Dad," breathed Ken in dismay. "Maybe I'll never get Flicka trained." "For God's sake, what have I been telling you? Warning you?" Ken stood in a stupor. "Didn't you understand?" asked his father. "What did you think loco meant?" "Oh, just goofy." "And when did you tumble?" "Yesterday. Tim said you could put crazy people in lunatic asylums, but you had to let crazy horses kill themselves." Rob gave a short, exasperated laugh. "Well, thank God for Tim." "Dad?" "Well?" "When you said she'd been so frightened always when we'd seen her, did you mean that maybe she isn't loco?" Before answering, Rob eyed the filly thoughtfully and drew several long puffs of smoke through his pipe. "She's got a very intelligent face," he said at last. "Much better than Rocket's. Fine, delicate mouth, lovely eyes set far apart, that light tracing of veins all over. But we can't really know until we see how she responds to training." "How can I train her? What shall I begin on?" "You can't do a thing with her now. All you can do is win her confidence. That's the most important thing anyway. There's one thing that will help you, Ken." "What?" "Her sickness and misery. When you take away everything, freedom, friends, home, habits, happiness from a living creature, almost life itself, it will turn in sheer need and desperation to the one thing that's left, and that's you." "Me?" Ken had never felt so important. "Yes, you are her whole world. Make her like it." It was a serious moment for Ken. He was thinking about himself in a way he never had before, and he paid close attention to all his father was saying. McLaughlin took his time, as if there was nothing to do but examine Flicka and explain to Ken what must be done with her. He stood with one arm folded across his belt, the other elbow resting on it, and the hand holding the bowl of his pipe. His legs, in their whipcord riding breeches and dark brown boots which were polished for the trip to Sargent's ranch until tints of oxblood showed in the folds of the leather, were braced apart. "I've been trying to breed fear out of these Western horses for years. Flicka has been frightened. Only one thing will ever thoroughly overcome that, and that is if she comes to trust you. Even so, some bad reactions of the fear may remain. This doesn't mean that you must not master her. You must. She will have many impulses that must be denied because you forbid the actions that arise from them. But that's discipline. That will come later if she gets well. Meantime, what can I do right now?" "Not a thing in the nature of discipline. Give her love. Give her companionship. Give her your voice. Talk to her." "I do, Dad, all the time." "That's right. Make her grow so dependent on you, so used to your coming and going, always with some good thing for her, hay, oats, fresh water, or just talk and friendship, that she can't help turning to you." McLaughlin paused, his thoughts going farther afield. "I have read stories of wild animals in circuses, vicious, untamable individuals, who became gentle and tractable because they fell ill or got hurt, and some human being tended them and cared for them kindly. It has often happened. That's why I say Flicka's weakness makes your opportunity. You don't have to restrain and discipline her, because her wounds are doing that already. And you are on her side, against her weakness and pain. You help her." Flicka had come closer and was looking at the salt. The lecture went on. "Remember, a horse can tell you a lot of things if you watch, and expect it to be sensible and intelligent. Pay attention to all the little signs, the way it moves its body, the ears, the eyes, the little whinnies. That's its way of talking. There is the neigh of terror, the scream of rage, the whinny of nervous impatience. That's a very funny sound. The nicker of longing or hunger or friendliness or delight or recognition. She'll talk to you, and it's for you to understand her. You'll learn her language, and she'll learn yours. Never forget that they understand everything you say to them." "Everything, Dad?" This was really exciting. "Everything. And when you once realize that, friendship with an animal begins to be quite a different thing. Communication, see?" When the red Studebaker, as clean and shining as if for a trip into church, had taken his parents over the cattle guard and around the bend of the hill, Ken hurried back into the calf pasture. Now that he knew Flicka could understand him, there were some more things he wanted to tell her. How sorry he was. He would stand in front of her and say, "I am Ken." That was important for her to know. "And I am your friend, Flicka. I am so sorry, so very sorry you are hurt, and I hope it doesn't hurt you much anymore. I'm going to give you everything you need, and I'll be with you so you won't be very lonesome. I'll have to leave to go swimming in a little while, and I'll have to walk my colts, but that won't be long." But Flicka wasn't near the pine tree. As Ken stood looking for her, he heard her neigh, and his heart gave a leap. It was as if she was speaking to him. It was the first sound she had made since her terrible screams in the stable the day she was caught. Then he saw where she was standing, at the southern fence, her head stretched over it, looking off to the saddleback. Her ears were pricked, she was listening, and Ken heard the faraway sound of hoofbeats. The yearlings were galloping on the upland. Flicka neighed again, and by the lift of her head and the way she was turned and the sound she made, Ken knew she was heartsick for the freedom she had lost. It was the neigh of longing. Ken's head dropped on his chest. There was a burning behind his eyes. He turned away and walked slowly back to the house.